Hi there, this video will discuss how to create a projectile element in a first-person game in the Unreal Engine 5. Previous videos I have shown how to create a first-person character setup from scratch, and then the last video we also talked about how to create a camera shake, so that's what I have going on in this project right now. One of the first things we're going to create is I have an inputs folder, and I'm going to create a new input. So if I right-click in the inputs folder, input action, I'm going to call this one IA primary shoot. This is going to be a boolean, so I'm not going to change the value type, leave it as digital bool. And in the input mapping context, I'm going to add a new mapping, and this new one down here, I'm going to find that IA primary shoot. Open it up, hit the keyboard symbol, and left click to add the left button mouse. We will save that. Back out of this. The second thing we're going to create is the projectile itself, and then we'll come back and add everything to the character blueprint. So if I right click in my character folder, I'm going to create a new actor blueprint. So I'm going to go to blueprint class and actor blueprint, and we'll call this one BP projectile. I'm going to open that up. One of the first things I'm going to create is a collision, so we'll add a sphere collision. I'm just going to do a simple ball projectile. And I'm going to call this one sphere cull. I'm going to drag this sphere collision over on top of the default scene root to get rid of the default scene root. So drag the collision on top of default scene root. I'm going to come over here and let's maximize this view so we can see it. I'm going to reduce the size of the sphere radius. Let's say instead of 32, 8, a much smaller projectile. And then I'm going to scroll down and change the collision preset of the collision to block all dynamic. I'm then going to come to the add components and add a sphere, the physical shape, the static mesh of my projectile. I'm going to scale this down maybe 0.2, 0.15. There we go, that looks pretty good, until it's just on the inside of the collision. Maybe 0.17. That's too much. 0.16. 0.155. That looks pretty good. Alright, so the sphere mesh, I can add a material to this. I can add any other materials that I may have in here. I think for now I'm just going to leave it alone because I don't think I've created anything else. But you can add a custom material. I am going to come down to the collisions of the sphere mesh and change the collision preset to no collision. I don't want to have any collisions on the mesh itself. I want to use the sphere collision as my collision for my projectile. Last thing I need to add is called a projectile movement. So if I click the add button, projectile movement, this is going to take care of how fast the projectile is going to move and in what direction. I'll zoom out a little bit. The x-axis is the forward direction, this left or right direction here, is the forward direction in Unreal. And that's going to be the forward direction of how I want this object to move throughout space with this projectile. So if I click projectile movement, I go up to the top, I'm going to find initial speed, and we'll put something really high, something like 5,000 for that. That's going to move in this horizontal direction towards this side of the ball. And then I'm going to go down to where it says velocity, and these three boxes are X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to increase the X velocity to 200. We're going to compile and save. We're going to go to this event graph, and the event graph, we're going to change this so that once the projectile hits an object, we're going to tell it to simulate physics. And this is just a choice, but if you want the object to continue bouncing around after it hits something, we're going to have projectile movement selected. Scroll down to the bottom over here, and where it says on projectile stop. If I click that on projectile stop, it's going to add this custom event. Whenever the projectile hits something else, do something. And what I want to do here is drag out and choose set simulate physics of the sphere collision, not the geometry. Okay, so that'll add the sphere collision object to the target. Then I need to click Simulate. If I click Compile and Save, then our projectile is going to work when my character fires it off when I click the left mouse button with my input that we created. Alright, so let's minimize that. We're going to go into our character blueprint now. And there's my blueprint set up for my character movement and my camera shake. I'm going to come down underneath that. And I'm going to come in here and create a custom event. And that event, we're going to right click and choose IA underscore primary shoot. We're going to find that custom input event we created before. I'm going to click the drop down arrow because we're going to use started. So that way every time I click the mouse button it's going to shoot one projectile. You can change that to triggered, but I'm going to use started for this. And we're going to drag from started and choose spawn actor from class. Spawn actor from class. Okay. From the class setting, we're going to find our BP projectile. And we need to tell it where to spawn from and then what angle or rotation to spawn from. So for my camera, we can create a kind of a stand-in gun. We're just going to use a simple cylinder right now, and you can replace that cylinder with a more complex gun later. But we need something to shoot or make it look like it's shooting from something. So let's add a cylinder. And I have my camera selected before I add the cylinder, so it should parent this underneath the camera. So I'm going to add a cylinder. And I'm going to rotate this. And then get my scale tool. Scale this down. Maybe 0.125. 0.125. There we go, that works. Maybe I'll make it a little longer. Uncheck the lock button. Make it 1 and the Z. I'm going to move it down, and I'm going to move it either to the left or to the right. And then I'm going to rotate it a little bit. So it's back towards kind of the center of where the camera would be. Okay. So I can compile and have an error. What is my error? Oh yes, so let's uncheck this for a second and compile so we can go test to see if that angle of the camera gun looks all right. Looks okay. I'm going to move it up and to the right a little more. So back in my character viewport, look up here, let's move it up a little bit, to the right a little bit, and compile and save. You can have this open while you're playing and test that out. That looks pretty good. You can keep playing around with the position of that. So that's going to be my stand-in gun. And then I need a blank node, which we're going to call a scene node. I'm going to have my cylinder selected. We're going to click the add button and add a scene node. A scene node is nothing but a blank object that has its own set of location, rotation, and scale attributes. So I'm going to take this and move it towards the end. Maybe I'll lower my movement snap down so I can get a little bit more precision here. Move it to the end of my cylinder. I'm going to keep it a little further away so that way it doesn't clip inside of the cylinder gun itself. So with a collision, how big the collision is on the projectile, you do need to make sure this is a little bit further away, not directly at the end of where the muzzle would be. Okay, so now that we have our scene node, we could rename that scene node projectile ref. In our event graph, we can connect our spawn actor back to our started. From the spawn transform, we need to create a node called make transform. Make transform. So that separates our transforms into location, rotation, and scale. And then we need a reference for that projectile ref, where we're shooting from. And we need a reference to the camera. So we're just going to left click and drag both of those into our scene, or the event graph. From the projectile ref, we need a location. So we're going to drag out from that and choose get world location. Okay, and that gets funneled into the location of the make transform. For our camera, we need a rotational axis of where the camera is facing. So we're going to drag out from camera, get world rotation. we're going to connect that to the rotation of the make transform. All right, so if we compile and save, we're done with our blueprint here. We can drag select this, comment out, shoot. We can add more to it later. Compile, save, and let's go test this out. So if I hit play, if I move my mouse around, if I left click, that projectile should shoot out into the world. The more I click, the more projectiles will come out. Physics will be applied to that. And it should eventually start to bounce off of things and settle down into place. It's moving a little fast according to how close I am. So if I get really close to surfaces, I may need to slow down the projectile a little bit. So maybe 5,000 was too fast, but here's where I can go make some adjustments. One other thing I want to point out here is that if I continue to click, it's going to continue to create more and more projectiles, and they'll never destroy themselves or disappear. So one thing we can consider is, well, how do we limit the amount of projectiles ever in the world? And we can do that with a simple destroy actor node. After a delay, after a certain amount of time, we can delay that, and then after the projectile is created, and then we can destroy each instance of the projectile. So that way we don't have thousands of different projectiles in the world at any given time. So we do all of that in the projectile blueprint. So if I open this up, maybe I'm going to go to the projectile movement and lower this down to maybe 3,500. Maybe let's do 4,000 instead. 4,000 for the initial speed. So it's not as fast. 4,000, not 400. And then after we simulate physics, we want to give it some time, maybe 5 seconds. We're going to drag out and add a delay. Maybe that'll be a 5-second delay. So we're typing 5 for duration. Then after that delay, we're going to do destroy actor. Okay, so destroy actor. After 5 seconds of each individual projectile is created, we'll compile and save. Then it's going to destroy each actor. So if I come in here and play again, see if I can get them closer to where I can see things. After 5 seconds of each individual projectile existing in the world, then it's going to delete that projectile. So that's a good way to kind of manage how many projectiles are in the world at any given time, especially if you have multiplayer aspects. And there's other ways you can manage that, but this is the kind of quick and easy way of creating a first-person shooter projectile in the Unreal Engine.